my favorite programs of the year because it's a nonprofit, focuses on nonprofits, and the Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership is a 501c3 nonprofit as well. So I always walk away learning more about how to run a nonprofit than I expected. A little bit about the partnership and what we do. We are focused on business attraction and retention for the city of Washington. We work closely with the Deputy Mayor's Office for Planning and Economic Development. And we've been doing this for the past 17 years. And how we do it is through place marketing and research data. Business attraction. We do that through a number of conferences that we host throughout the year or attend throughout the year. ICSC, many of you all may have heard of this conference. It's the International Council of Shopping Centers. We have been conducting this on behalf of the city for the past 17 years, and the purpose is to attract retailers to the District of Columbia. Another big initiative that we started about 6 years ago was South by Southwest. This will be our 6th year going into South by Southwest in Austin, Texas. And the focus of this is really to bolster up DC's economy by focusing on the creative scene and the tech sector here in Washington, D.C. Some of the services that we provide are space finding tours and site location assistance. So many of you all in the room may be on the hunt for spaces here in the city. We offer free space finding assistance for folks. If you're looking for office space, shared space, retail space, industrial space, we can give you a virtual tour of the city within an hour and a half through our GIS system. So we track all the vacant spaces that are located here in the district. And it's free of charge. On the areas of business development, many of you all may have in front of you our publication, Doing Business in DC Guide. With this guide, it's a step-by-step guide of how to open your business or expand your business in the district. You have a supplemental piece in front of you. It's called the focus of this is for nonprofits. So it delves down into the basic nuts and bolts of how to open a nonprofit or expand it or team up with other folks. So be sure and take that or take more of those with your friends who are interested. And then we have an upcoming annual meeting, Economic Showcase. This event will take place on the 12th of December, about 4 or 5 weeks from now. And the keynote speaker this year will be David Rubenstein. So we're excited about having him as a keynote speaker at this event. We will showcase all the economic development that's occurring throughout the city. Along with that, anything that you want to know what's happening in the city, we'll release another one of our publications, which is the DC Development Report. This report is an overview of all the economic development that's occurring in the city that focuses on education, retail, hospitality, residential, and the office market. Research data, as I've just mentioned, the development report. In addition to that, we also have our neighborhood profiles. This publication is a compendium of 54 neighborhoods throughout the city, and we provide demographic information for 54 neighborhoods. So anything you want to know as far as household income, the makeup, demographic information of who's in the neighborhood, how much they're spending, that information is available in this publication. And as well as our last publication, Emerging Corridors. This publication focuses on those opportunities for investment in some of the emerging neighborhoods throughout the city. So we provide these type of resources and more that you can either take away today from a hard copy, or you can go online and also find these locations on our website, WDCEP.com. One thing that we're very conscious of is the return on investment from the work that we do. So every 2 years, we contract out an assessment of the work that the partnership has done over the past 17 years. And what we found through doing an economic and fiscal impact study is that since we've been around since 2001, that our impact to the city has created over 17,000 jobs. We've increased the sales tax revenue by $94.1 million, And we've been able to help lease over $5.6 million, 5.6 million square feet of space throughout the city. With that, that concludes my overview of the partnership. I'm happy to announce Lee Perrine, who is our manager for small business and innovation, entrepreneurship. Thank you, Lee.
Good morning. Again, my name is Lee Perrine, and I'm the manager of small business and entrepreneurship here at the partnership. This is my first event at the partnership, so I'm happy that all of you are here for this DC Biz Chat. So we've assembled a great panel, and so just to review the format for this morning, we're going to call up each panelist. They'll do a brief presentation, and then at the end of those presentations, you'll be able to ask questions. So if there's something that comes to you in the middle of their presentations, please take a note, and then we'll get to you at the end. But all of your questions will be answered. And I would also like to thank our sponsors for today's event: the Executive Office of the Mayor, the Deputy Mayor's Office of Planning and Economic Development, and Capital One Bank. Our first panelist is Pat Henry. Pat Henry is the Deputy Director of the DC Mayor's Office of Partnerships and Grant Services and serves as the district government's liaison for nonprofit and faith-based organizations. Mrs. Henry's role is to assist these organizations in creating and enhancing partnerships to maximize their funding and provide capacity building training that will address the District of Columbia's community issues and strategic priorities. She manages capacity building initiatives called the Strengthening Communities Initiatives. Strengthening Communities, that initiative coordinates and facilitates citywide capacity building and technical assistance workshops. Ms. Henry also coordinates the annual Public-Private Partnership Conference, targeting a multi-sector audience. Ms. Henry has diversified experience in administration and management, which includes human resource and financial management. She also has experience in customer relations, lobbying, fundraising, public relations, event planning, and community organizing. Pat, thank you for joining us this morning.
First, I'd like to really thank the Economic Development Partnership for inviting me today, because I always like to come to talk about the nonprofit community and everything that they really provide to the residents of the District of Columbia, because we realize that DC government cannot do it alone. So that's why it's so important that we have opportunities like this to talk about the importance of nonprofit organizations. And also, whenever I have my bio is read, is like, okay, that's a lot. Is that telling people how long I've been doing this or how old I am? So I think I'm gonna have to revise that, because that's a lot. But anyway, I have a lot to discuss in a short period of time, and I just want you to know it's kind of quick and dirty, so I won't be able to go over everything. But we have a lot of resources that you can use that will help you. And like I always tell folks, the resources that we provide are free, because I say it's your tax dollars at work. So when we have capacity building training, when we have whatever we do, it's always free. And I wanted to ask the opportunities for folks to come to find out about the properties that are available. Are those free properties, or they have to pay rent? Okay, you got to be clear when you're talking to nonprofits. Okay, so I'm going to go to the first slide. Okay. Oh, okay. And sometimes that's not easy, but anyway. So I wanted to ask you, why should you consider becoming a nonprofit? So what's your why? Why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you feel there's a need in the community that's not really being addressed by another organization? One thing I found that a lot of folks who want to start nonprofits, they'll say, well, I'm the only one that's doing this. Don't ever say that, because there is somebody else that's doing it. They might not be doing it the way you want to do it, but you need to ask yourself that question. So if it is another organization out there that's doing that, what's going to make yours different? And are you going to be able to provide additional services that really justify you becoming a nonprofit? Those are the types of things you need to ask yourself. But the big question is, will you be able to recruit board members? Will you be able to recruit volunteers? And will you be able to raise money? Now, with nonprofit organizations, the board members are not paid. So you need to think about that. So those are all volunteers. Those are folks that are doing it because they agree or they have the same mission and the compassion to help people that you do. So that's really important. So what do you need to know? Well, it doesn't really operate, a nonprofit doesn't operate for the purpose of generating profits for the folks that work there. And it prohibits you from giving income, like I just said, to your members, directors, or officers beyond the expenses and your employees' salaries. But does your organization really qualify to be tax exempt? And you can't have purpose or activities that are illegal, and I know that's not a problem in this room, or violate fundamental public policy. For example, you can't engage in discrimination. You can't. So, in the District of Columbia, we have a lot of nonprofits. For 501c3 public charities, there are 12,360. Out of those, 8,000 are private foundations, and you have other nonprofit organizations, 3,864, like your Chamber of Commerce, your civic leagues, and your veterans organizations, but you also have your small community-based organizations that are not 501c3s that do, and I call them sometimes, those are the organizations that have the boots on the ground, that are right there in the community serving those folks that a lot of folks can't get to. So what does it qualify to become a nonprofit? Number one, you can't benefit any private stakeholder or individual. So executive directors, you don't want to start a nonprofit because the executive director thinks they're going to make $200,000 or $400,000. Not happening. No lobbying or advocacy can't be the substantial part of your organization activities. Not saying that you can't provide education on different advocacy issues, you can do that, but it can't be the number one part of your activities. You cannot participate in any political campaigning on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. Does anyone know what happened when Obama was running and NAACP was under scrutiny with the IRS? Because they were campaigning and they were in a position where their status might have been taken. Also with churches, the pastor should not, and they shouldn't, tell their parishioners who to vote for. That was also under scrutiny. So you have to be really careful. And you cannot operate for the purpose of conducting a trade or business that's not related to your exempt purpose. Now you can sell t-shirts or you can sell caps and things like that, but that's called intellectual property. You can do that. So what are alternatives? And I was talking to David when we were standing outside. You can get a fiscal sponsor. And the purpose of the fiscal sponsor is if you don't have your 501c3, it's going to be really hard at times to get funding. Because when you're 501c3, whoever's giving you the funding can write it off. And that's really important. So you can have what we call a fiscal sponsor who will be the person who gets your check, pay all of your expenses, but also do your bookkeeping and everything else that's required when you get that funding. And that's really important. So you need to be really careful when you get a fiscal sponsor because you want to know if that person is legitimate, are they able to do the accounting that you need done. I've seen situations where a nonprofit got a fiscal agent and the fiscal agent did not pay the proper taxes like Social Security, employment insurance. They didn't do that. So what happened, this was a small nonprofit. They had to end up paying to the IRS. So they eventually went out of business. So you need to know who you're going to partner with. Don't make that mistake. But then sometimes, and the majority of the times, you have to give that fiscal agent a administrative fee. Normally it's 5%, but you negotiate that. The Foundation Center has a video on fiscal sponsors. So if you go to their website and check, look up videos on fiscal sponsors, they'll give you a lot of information. And like I said, there's a lot of free information out here that you need to utilize, because what you want to do is you want to use your money for your program, not for a lot of other things that you're doing. So what's next? Well, a lot of people don't understand that the 501c3 is different than registering in the District of Columbia to do business as a nonprofit. Those are two different things. So first, you have to file your articles of incorporation with the DC regulatory agency, and that costs $80. I'm telling you, to register for DC and with IRS is going to be a cost. Then you'll receive your certificate of authority that you are able to do business in the District of Columbia. That's just the first couple of steps. But there's some folks who have registered in Delaware or some other state because they think that it's much cheaper. Well, what's going to happen is when you come to DC and you want to start a nonprofit, guess what? You're going to have to re-register in DC. You're going to have to pay another $80. And you're called a foreign corporation, which I don't really like that word, but that's what they call it. And then you'll receive your certificate of registration. But that's not all. So before you can become a nonprofit to operate in the district, you have to show proof that you have your tax exempt status with the IRS, which is kind of weird because I know on the 183, that's the application you fill out, they ask you if you're registered in your state as a nonprofit, which I don't understand that, but that's what you do. But also, you have to have a certificate of occupancy, and to show that there is an address in the district that you're working from, you need a business license. And the business license is $412. And they have two types. You have the charitable exempt, which you don't have to pay, but then you have the charitable solicitation, which is $412. And what that is giving you the authority to raise funds, to go to people and ask for money, that you can have casino night, or you can have some kind of fundraiser. These things you have to have. So the resources to help you get through the maze, you have DCRA, the Small Business Resource Center. They're very good because they do one-on-one sessions. They also have quarterly on nonprofit workshops, and they have folks from Office of Tax and Revenue, they have folks from DCRA, anybody that you need to talk to find out what it is that you need to be registered in the District of Columbia legitimately. I'll put that in. But then you have the DC Pro Bono program, and they're excellent because they will provide you legal assistance to talk about anything that if you're not clear on how to do your business license or your business plan, or you have some issues I know some nonprofits, they might have issues with landlords. This is all free. You can call them. You can even talk to them and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And they'll give you an idea. Well, maybe you shouldn't do this because it's too many expenses involved. And it's all free. So I've given you the person to talk to, Regina Hopkins, she's great. I've given you the website, and I've also given you the number. So please take advantage of that. You have the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, and they're a membership organization that is really great because they provide, of course, educational capacity building support. They have networking, they do advocacy, so you don't have to do it, but they have group buying. They have what they call a back office. Now, if you're going to have employees, you'll have to provide health insurance. You have to get your board insurance. They can give that to you, or they provide that to you at a really discounted rate because they're doing it on a group rate. So think about that, because those are the kind of things you're going to need your board insurance. You're going to need things that you never thought. And for some organizations that have youth programs, and you might have an activity at the DC Rec Department, you're going to have insurance. So those types of things you need to think about. And then there's my office, and we're great. But what we do is we try to enhance the capacity not only of nonprofit organizations, but district government agencies. We also work with faith-based organizations to help identify, apply, and secure resources that advance the mayor's top public policy priorities. And that is helping the residents of the District of Columbia. So what we do is we provide research technical support on federal and other grant and resource-based opportunities. We have capacity building support for the local nonprofit and faith-based organizations. We have workshops on how to write grants, board development. We just, maybe 7 years ago, we started what we call an 8-week grant writing workshop. And that's held usually in May. It's held in the evening from 6 to 8. And you have an intensive workshops on how to write fundable proposals. Not just how to write a proposal, but fundable proposals. And the facilitator, he will review. What we ask you to do is to bring a grant that you want to apply for. And then during the workshop, you write that grant, and the facilitator will work with you to make sure that it's funded. And we've had a lot of success. We've had organizations who have never gotten federal grants before and have gotten $2 million grants for 3 years. It's just really amazing. But the thing is, you can get all the capacity building support you want, but if you just leave this room and you never get in touch with any of us or look at the PowerPoint, then you just had a really good morning workshop with good coffee and whatever. But you have to take action, because it's not going to just happen. But we also admitted the mayor's policies and procedures governing donations to the district government. And if you didn't know that, folks are able to donate in kind as well as money to the district government. But there's a process, because they can't just say, I want to give 10,000 books to all the schools in DC. That's fine. But you have to go through the process so we make sure that those books get to the public schools and not end up in somebody's basement or garage. And it's been proven to be very, very successful. So, as I said before, we have nonprofit and faith-based capacity building, and we do it all year. We don't have anything going on because it's the end of the year, but we also have 501c3 workshops in partnership with the DC Pro Bono Law Office, where she'll go through the application to help you complete it. So you don't have to really pay somebody $500 or $600, $700. You don't have to go to Zoom Legal to get them to do it for you. You can do it yourself. We have monthly workshops during the year, like I was saying, the grant writing workshop. And we also have our Grants Information Resource Center. So one of the things that we find is there is money out there, but what happens is you don't really know where to go get it. People tell you all the time there's money out there, but if you don't know where to go get it, then you don't know where to go get it. So what we do is we have a Grants Information Resource Center. We have a bank of computers in our office where we have a staff person that will sit with you and find out, okay, what are you looking for? And then they'll go through, because we have some databases that we pay for that are really very expensive, but you can go through the internet and find funding opportunities. It's amazing. But the really great thing we have is what we call our weekly Funding Alert newsletter. Now, how many people know about the newsletter? Yay. But that's a really good tool. You get it every Monday morning. It's free. We have over 13,000 subscribers. And we have information in the Funding Alert on federal grant opportunities, local opportunities, because DC agencies have to give us that information to provide to you. And we also have foundation opportunities. And it's really amazing how the foundation, there are a lot of foundations out there to give money for so many different things. We also have a resource section, and I find that a lot of people kind of overlook the resource section, but there are a lot of funding opportunities in that resource section. They have a tendency to look at just the funding opportunities. So don't overlook the resource section. And to to sign up for the funding alert, you can just go to our website and sign up. And like I said, it's free and you get it every Monday. And this is just a picture of our Grants Information Resource Center, so you can see our staff person sitting there helping a nonprofit find some funding opportunities. And it's very seldom that nobody finds anything, because you have to make an appointment, but we give you, it's supposed to be 2-hour blocks, but sometimes people just stay. And once you come the first time and work with our staff person, you can come again and work on your own. But you have to stay on the site, and you can't just go off on some different sites that you're not supposed to go on. So, you want me to take questions now? Okay. So this is all my contact information, and like I said, if you're interested in getting a copy of the PowerPoint, then just give me your email address, but also in the funding alert, there's this information. And thank you very much. I do also have a copy of how you can start a nonprofit in DC, and it's very detailed. And the DC Pro Bono Law Office put this together. So again, I can give it to Lee, and he can send it out. It's an excellent document.
So I'll add that to your email as well. And there's also some physical handouts at the front that you can take on your way out. So next up, we're going to have Mazi Mutafa, who is the founder and executive director of Words Beats in Life. But before I introduce him, I just wanted to show a short video so you can get a better idea of the work that he's doing here in the District of Columbia. Mazi Mutafa is the executive director of Words Beats in Life, a 15-year-old hip-hop nonprofit based in Washington, D.C., that teaches, convenes, and presents hip-hop in the district, throughout the country, and around the world. Mazi Mutafa began this organization as an after-school program dedicated to creating transformative learning experiences in non-traditional classroom settings, teaching the elements of hip-hop. Mazi?
So good morning, everybody. So out of curiosity, just by show of hands, how many people don't have their 501c3 status already? Okay, cool. So one of the questions I have for everybody is, how many people who already have a nonprofit or are planning to start one started it because you love doing expense reports and coding receipts and raising money? How many people, you're starting your nonprofit because you want to do those things? Really?
I like raising
Raising, okay. I like raising money too. Part of the reason why I asked that question, though, is because most people who start nonprofits don't necessarily think about the nuts and bolts, kind of the back office work that has to get done to be able to support the organization. Another question, out of curiosity, how many of you can see yourself doing the work that you're either currently doing if you have a nonprofit, or that you're proposing to do for the next 15 years of your life? Okay. Do you believe, for all the people that raise their hands, how many of you believe that your vision is expansive enough that you can build momentum around it to get other people to continue that work after you're done, once you've decided you want to move on to the next thing? Okay. These are the kind of questions that are super important to be asking as you begin to build something. One of my favorite quotes of myself is that your challenge as a leader is to find people who you agree enough with to work with on the things you agree about. You don't need to find people who you agree with everything about, but the things that you agree about, work with them on those things, which creates lots of opportunities for partnerships and to build bridges into institutions with other organizations that you might not have originally thought would be your partners. So this video, we shared it in part because it was the inaugural Words Beats in Life Festival, which happened last year with a lot of the activities happening at the Kennedy Center. And it was kind of the culmination of 15 years worth of relationship building. So you saw footage, for those of you that are familiar with DC, you saw footage from Busboys and Poets, which was a restaurant that adopted us 5 years ago. And we hosted the inaugural DC Youth Poet Laureate competition at that event, which was the footage that was there. You saw people dancing and performing on the Millennium Stage at the Kennedy Center, which was a 5-year-old relationship and culminated in this 7-day festival where they donated the space to us as a partner that would have cost us $80,000 and put money into the event that we were able to do for free. But that was the result of having worked with them on the thing that they were interested in that we were also interested in, which was broadening their audience and adding more depth to their programming around hip hop. You wouldn't necessarily, maybe many of you wouldn't think hip hop in the Kennedy Center before I just showed you that video or before you saw some of the articles that have come out in the last couple of years, but the Kennedy Center is deeply rooted in the idea of being invested in communities here in Washington, D.C., and the hip hop community is a part of that. They've done tons of work with the choral community, the dance community, et cetera. And so thinking about the vision that you're building as an entrepreneur and who it is that will be naturally aligned with that vision. Since I knew that my auntie Pat, because we actually went through programs at the Office of Partnerships and Grant when we first started 16 years ago, we've actually gone through 10 different capacity building initiatives in DC and around the country. So we've had a lot of training around things like elevator pitches, mission statements, grant writing, et cetera. And I think that one of the things I want to encourage each of you to do is to investigate the various kinds of capacity building that exist. Because DC is super about that life in terms of investing in profits and the idea that nonprofits can be natural partners for government and corporate entities here in Washington, D.C. I actually began Words Beats in Life as a conference my junior year in college, and when I was graduating, I decided to turn it into a nonprofit. I never actually imagined, though, that the vision was big enough that it could be my job. I actually thought this would be something I would do once a month where I'd get hip-hop artists to volunteer to go into communities and share what it is that they knew. And at that time, there was a crime emergency in the district. There were a number of shootings in particular parts of the city, and the DC government decided to invest money into programming in recreation centers. And we were already in a rec center because we had insurance, and Parks and Rec gives you space in recreation centers if you have insurance and you can prove that if something happens, you can pay to fix it. And so we got a grant from the deputy mayor's office to turn what was our once-a-month Saturday program into an every night, late-night program at the Benning Park Recreation Center. That was our very first location. Since that time, I think last year we had 12 locations operating throughout the city through partnerships with things like the DC Public Libraries. We had 7 locations doing classes 1 to 2 days a week. We had partnerships with Parks and Rec. We've had partnerships with multiple places of worship. There's lots of empty spaces that are looking particularly to engage young people, but also disconnected populations, returning citizens. People are looking to be partners and allies in that work. So your challenge is to find vacant spaces, but also to find people who have spaces that just aren't activated in the ways that they want. One of the most important things you'll do is determine what neighborhood you're going to want to have an impact in. One of the things that was really instructive for me in forming the nonprofit was talking to the IRS. One of the questions they ask you when you're filing your paperwork is how much money do you think, what do you think your budget is going to be? And I asked the question, why does that matter? And they said, well, because if you think your budget is going to be less than $250,000, the fee for processing your paperwork is this much. And if you think it's going to be more than $250,000, the fee for processing it is this much. Now, like most of you, I thought my budget was going to be more than $250,000, but I didn't realize how long it would take me to get there. So this idea, and so I asked, so what happens if we raise more than $250,000? And the answer, what do you think the answer was? What would the IRS do if you raised more than what you said you were going to do in the application? What'd you say? What was your answer? So up the fee. So the answer was nothing, actually. They would do nothing. But what they would do is charge you more on the front end based on your ambition. So you think you're going to be a multi-million-dollar thing, you feel it's going to cost you more. But if you actually didn't raise $1 million your first year of existence, there was actually there was no benefit to you actually having that great ambition and filling out the paperwork. So the point of that story is only ask questions of anybody that gives you information, because there's probably another answer below the question that you didn't think to ask yet. It's also super important, like Auntie Pat was saying, when people give you their contact information, they gave it to you because they want to be followed up. They actually want to be a resource. We went through the program for our Office of Partnerships and Grants 16 years ago. She still says to me grants that she thinks we qualify for. I got a grant from Pat like 2 months ago. Like, this should be perfect for Words Beats in Life. You should apply. We're doing this this grant writing training. Do you have any staff? Like, reaching out to me to be a part of programming. And I think that's one of the major things about the nonprofit community in Washington, D.C., especially in terms of partnering with government, that people want to see you succeed because you exist to actually improve the quality of life of the city and its citizens. So that fact in and of itself means that you add value to every conversation that you're a part of. You're always a vital ally. You're always an equal partner at the table, regardless of whether you have as much money as the people you're talking to or not. You bring people, you bring talent, you bring quality that they can't on their own because they need citizens. They need outside partners to be able to enhance the work that they're doing. The reality is that when we went around the room and said all the different things that are happening, and like this room literally has the ability, if all of you decided today that you were going to pick a neighborhood tomorrow to start working in, you would radically change what's happening in that community. Because you're doing housing, you're doing returning citizens, you're doing choral work, so you're bringing the arts, you're doing all the things that actually make a neighborhood someplace that people want to live and that the people who live there can thrive in. And that's important for you to understand that the work that you're potentially doing or proposing to do can be radically transformational for not just the people that you serve, but for the people that do the work. And that's one of the other points I wanted to bring up. That a lot of times when people start nonprofits, it's all about the client. It's all about the people that you want to serve. But it's also about the culture that you create in the place that you're building. So one of my favorite questions, new questions to ask people is, when's the last time you went to the doctor? When's the last time you saw a dentist? When's the last time you actually had a vacation? What are you doing to take care of yourself? Because you cannot be a healer if you are sick. What are you doing to build an organization that is healthy in and of itself to promote health in a community? How do you do that? How do you care for the people that work in the place that you're building to be a reflection of what it is the people who you serve can aspire to? One of the most important questions I ever got asked by a young person was, Mozzie, how come nobody in Words Beats in Life has any children? All of the adults that I hired who are roughly my age, I'm now 40, that almost none of us have children because almost all of us have dedicated our lives to transforming other people's lives. And I think that's noble, and I think it's wonderful. But I also think that we would be healthier if we also took the time to invest in ourselves, to invest in our own development. I'm saying that not just as the leader of one organization, but as a part of a community. What are we doing as a community to ensure our own health? Auntie talked about most folks don't start it because they want to get a $200,000 or $400,000 salary, and that's true. But the question is, are you building a thing? When I asked that question about who did this because they want to code receipts, did you do this in part because you actually want to provide health care for people that work for you? That you actually want to have people to have a high quality of life and do good in the world, that they don't have to be martyrs to the work that you're asking them to do. They can actually be benefited as well. And I'm not talking about necessarily wealth, but about wellness. What are you doing to promote wellness in the thing that you're trying to build? The name of our organization is Words, Beats, and Life. That the life part of the work you do is not just the way that you impact clients. It is when people are excited to wake up and come into work to do the thing that you have charged them to do. And I think it's really important for most of the leaders and the people that work in the organizations to ask those kind of questions of yourselves and of your employers and of your future employers, to be thinking about the idea of what do you get out of this work? One of them, again, this is not a quote from Mozzie, is a quote from my bookkeeper. She said this to me in our 8th year, because at the time, I wasn't really super focused on the quality of life of the people that work for me. I felt like, well, they have a job, and what they do with that money is what they do. She said to me, Mozzie, words, beats, and life can't be the only one that wins. Like in the partnerships, in the relationships, in the negotiations, you can't be the only winner. So how do you build partnerships, relationships, exchanges that are mutually beneficial? Beneficial to you, beneficial to your client, beneficial to the people that are committed to doing the work. Because part of the reason why I think, at least, so many people in the nonprofit sector suffer from burnout is because the people charged with their care are not actually taking care of them. That's actually my responsibility as an executive director. I don't do my programming. I take care of my people. And if I'm not taking care of my people, if my people are sick, or if my people don't have the things that they need to provide for themselves, that's my failure. Because I've hired them to take care of the client. It's my job to take care of them. And if you're a founder, or if you're an executive, or a manager, that's your job, is to make sure the program is quality, but part of the way you do that is making sure that your people are actually taken care of. Does that make sense to anybody but me? And I think that part of that is about thinking about the office culture or virtual culture that you want to build. And these are not things I thought about when I started this organization. Again, like I said, I never imagined this would be a job. I imagined this would be a volunteer thing that I did once a month after I did for my regular job. But I got really fortunate. I think, because I decided to do mostly a talk, the last thing I'll say is it's really important to be thinking about how you manage human resources and material resources. And by human resources, I mean many founders, maybe this is part of founder syndrome, many founders create jobs that nobody else wants to do. Either because we create jobs that are literally like 3 or 4 jobs put into one, so we can't necessarily ever exit, so we stay forever, or our organizations fold. So how do you create jobs that would actually not just benefit the organization, but benefit the individual you're hiring? I'm really proud of the fact that maybe 3 years ago, I sat on a panel at Busboys and Poets about internships and not paying for them. I'd never paid for an internship because I felt like this is a person who's coming here to get experience, and we're providing them an opportunity. And I sat on a panel with 2 people who called that wage theft, which is a term I'd never heard. And then there was a server in the audience who was like, you know, Mozzie, I think the work that you do is awesome, but I can't afford to not get paid and work for you, which helped me to think about the fact that the unpaid internship was great for the organization, but we were the only one winning in that situation, because we were getting free work, someone was getting an experience, but what if we just paid them something? If we created a travel stipend, so that at least it's not costing them something to come to work. And then we went from a travel stipend to actually doing an hourly wage. And I think that it's important that I only bring that up because one of the things that the nonprofit sector is great at is figuring out how to do $5 worth of work for 15 cents. But the problem with that, because I always thought when I built the organization, I had a field of dreams mentality, which is if you build it, they will come. That if you do that $5 worth of work for 15 cents, eventually someone will see it and give you $5. And what I discovered over time is that's actually really not true. What people do is when they see you do $5 worth of work for 15 cents is they keep giving you 15 cents. They say, thank you so much for that $5 worth of work, nonprofit, that I don't value enough to actually pay for the real value. And we do that to ourselves. We do that when we submit grant proposals and don't build in the true administrative cost. We do that when we decide to be a part of things like the United Way that say you must have an overhead that's less than X% or else you can't be a part of it, and we don't advocate for that to be changed. We do that to ourselves by not educating donors about the real cost of doing good. And it's important, and I'm not saying this to beat up on the sector, but to say that we have to be our best advocates too. That becomes our responsibilities as the founders and the leaders, is to advocate for what is and not just talk about what could be. And if you're going to join this sector, you want to start a nonprofit, I'm not, when Lee asked me to come, I said, you really want me to come tell these people not to start a nonprofit? You really want me to come and do that? Because that's usually what I tell people when they say, well, how do I start a nonprofit? I say, don't. And not because I've had a terrible experience, but because it's so much more difficult than I thought it would be. And most nonprofits that come into existence don't last because people didn't realize all the things they had to do. All those fees that Auntie was talking about, those you have to pay every 2 years. So those are not one-time fees. Most of them are annual or biannual fees. So, and they're not a lot of money, but they're tedious, and you got to make sure that you remember, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, so I decided not to come and say, don't start a nonprofit. I decided to come and say, if you're going to build it better than what you've seen. Learn what's out there, because you're not the only one that wants to do it. You probably are the only one that wants to do it the way you want to do it, but learn from the mistakes of the people that did it a different way. Because there's so much opportunity for partnership with those people that should be your competition to be your co-opetition, to be the people that you're working with as a coalition to be able to do good better, because ultimately that's what a nonprofit is. It's a business dedicated to doing good better. We can do that. Thank you.
So now we're going to open it up to question and answer. So if you could raise your hand, Patrina's going to come around with the mic, and you can ask your question. We just ask that you project when asking your question.
My first question is actually for the fiscal sponsor. How long do you have to have the 501c3 fiscal sponsor through your process? Is it all the way up to the receiving of your nonprofit exemption from the IRS? Or, like, for example, right now, because we're applying, we found that we are exempt during the process, but do we still need, is it specific? I don't think it actually works. It's for the, I'm so sorry. So do we need to provide that, all of that information to a fiscal agent, or are we able to work by ourselves and kind of sustain that as long as we keep the correct bookkeeping, et cetera?
You know, sometimes that depends on who the grantor is. Because sometimes they will accept the letter. If you have a letter saying that we received your application and it's in review, and sometimes they will accept it. But if you decide you're going to do a fiscal agent until you receive your actual letter of exemption, then you have to do it up to the period of the grant is over.
So this is specific to grants, not necessarily to solicitation from individuals. Okay, that's very helpful. And I will say, so we've been engaged in this process for about 7 months, and your presentation was incredibly helpful. Even though there were a lot of things in there that I knew, there were still little bits, nuts and bolts that I highly recommend that if everyone gets an opportunity to review the presentation, to do that. One more question was regarding nonprofit lawyer recommendations. So as we engaged in the process, we found that so for example, I have a full-time job that's incredibly full-time. It's about 60 hours a week. So while I saw a need, as well as our board member, the people who are now our board members, it was still a lot of that work that we had some funding that we could source out so that we could have someone work with us and for us. Is there a database or recommendation by your office that can recommend people who are able to do this work? Because just going out and asking for recommendations and calling around, I found it very difficult to find people who operate not only in nonprofit law, but that weren't $15,000 to $20,000. I mean, it was a lot of those larger firms that were kind of quoting us that. And I will recommend our lawyer, by the way, if anyone wants to know after. But go ahead.
My suggestion would be to take advantage of the DC Pro Bono Law Office and call Regina Hopkins, and she can help you with that. Because they are pro bono, we have so many law offices in the district. One of the things that they do is to provide community service. So I would definitely suggest you contact them.
Okay, I'm a teacher, so I talk loud. So anyway, so my question is also around fiscal sponsorship. And we have a for-profit here in the district running successfully for 8 years now. And can your for-profit serve as your fiscal agent for the nonprofit? Is that permissible?
That's kind of dicey.
Okay. Well, because when you had just talked about the cautionary tale of, having a partner, on a grant.
I'm gonna give you an example. That's just like you start, You're starting your nonprofit, you're getting your board members together. You can't have all your family members on your board. And that's basically what that kind of looks like.
Okay. Okay. And then my other question, as far as utilizing the GIRC, are we able to use that as we're going through the process? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right.
I'm not sure what it is that you guys want to do as far as your nonprofit is concerned, but I'm sure you'll be able to partner with some other organization that's out here.
Well, because the other thing, when you spoke about in-kind donations, because we do hospitality tourism training, specifically getting those the low-income, hard-to-serve populations into entry-level positions in hotels. And so I would be interested, one of the reasons we thought about the nonprofit piece was presented to us because we have been wanting them to experience it. And so having them stay for a weekend at a hotel and see the book and the curriculum come to life. And so just looking to see how we can partner with hotels to have that type of experience.
So is your business in DC?
It is.
So are you a certified business enterprise with DC? Okay. All right.
Also known as a CPE.
Right, right. So have you talked with Department of Employment Services? Because they're always looking for, you have, okay. What about what about CSOSA? Anyway, let's talk.
Yes,
Okay, we'll talk.
Everyone.
Okay,
And we currently work with the Department of Human Services.
Okay.
With the UDC PASS program.
Okay.
As well as United Planning Organizations of different, ways getting people employed.
Okay.
Certified employed.
okay, great. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, it was an excellent presentation. I wanted to make a comment and then a question. So often when I speak to folks who are interested in starting a nonprofit, they have the skill set for the mission and for staffing a nonprofit. But one thing that people don't really focus on is board management. That's a completely different skill set that very few folks are ever prepared for. They're not classes out there readily available that I'm aware of like how to manage your board, how to get them to work for you. If you all know of any resources, I know of a resource of one that, because I'm in an executive leadership group for nonprofits, but if you all know of any resources that you could share with the audience, I think it would be very beneficial because, again, folks never talk about board management and that skill set. That's that third wheel of nonprofit management that's highly needed.
Yeah, it was. Actually, it is. I know Board Source is a very good one, and they offer training, and there are people that are in the area that work with boards on board management, on board development, and that's one of the things that I do actually. So there are definitely resources, and Board Source is a great one for that.
And I just wanted to add that the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, they also have workshops on board development. But I think the number one thing you need to do is just pray.
So one of the things that we do with our board members' letter of agreement is we actually mandate that they have to participate in trainings that are going to make them better board members. There actually used to be a board member training that was out of a nonprofit that no longer exists. I think it was DC Serve. They actually used to do like a 3-month-long board training where people would enroll, and then they would basically encourage those people to find nonprofits, because it was people who wanted to serve on boards but didn't necessarily have a board they wanted to serve on yet. So they'd go through training to learn about what it meant to be a board member, and then be farmed out. I think that I was literally having this conversation yesterday. I think part of the challenge, though, is, and why it is sometimes we got to pray in working with our boards, is because I think board members in a nonprofit sector have a wrong understanding of what they're actually responsible for. And by that I mean that the title Board of Directors leads most boards to operate in a way that the boss, that they're the boss of the executive director. And as a founder, it's a different, but like boards usually do hire an executive director, but they don't operate in the same way that a boss does, because they're not there managing the person day to day. They're responsible for an annual evaluation, ideally. But I think that the way to actually, and I'm planning to actually try this with my board, is to talk about them as not being a board of directors, but a board of protectors. That their job is to protect the resources of the organization and the institution itself for future employees, future clients, future executive directors. Their job is to protect it. And that protection can take the form of that fiscal sponsorship, that fiscal responsibility, the legal obligations that come with that. And so that if they see themselves as in partnership with me to advance the mission of the organization and protect it, the organization, for future clients, that changes the kind of relationship we have. So then when we talk about fundraising, I'm asking you to raise money not just because I think it's great if we have more money. I'm asking you to raise money because the organization needs it. It has an annual operating budget that you approve. And in order for us to make sure that the expense side and the revenue side meet, we actually need you to help protect that budget to ensure. So like, I think part of it is language. Because and I saw this with my actual programs, when I had program directors versus program managers, people operated in a way that was different because they thought about their responsibilities differently. So I think part of it is the language, but part of it is also the founders understanding that these are your partners. And the way you enter into that kind of partnership, because ideally your board members come from the community, they are representatives of the city in which you work, and so they have a vested interest in your success. Again, operate always from the position of whoever you're interacting with is invested in your success, because you make the lives of other people better and the city in which they work or live or play better.
Thank you. Not really a question, but more of a comment to what Marzi was saying and also what you said at the beginning, Eric. The first nonprofit board that I served on was primarily staffed by people with a really strong business background, and the expectations of us as the board were very clear. They were high expectations, but we knew what we were signing up for. There was a lot of really clear messaging, as you talked about, as to why we were being asked to do what we were being asked to do. Since then, I'm presently on the board of a much smaller organization where I'm actually much more committed to their mission. And it's a sort of frustrating board situation because they don't really know what they want me for. I'm the one who's asked sort of, okay, what's my responsibilities around fundraising, around commitments of time and energy and skills, and they've been surprised at the questions that I've asked. So I think there's a preemptive step, which is figure out why, beyond the rules and regulations, do you want a board? Who do you want on that board? What are your expectations that are universal to every board member? And what are the expectations that are specific to a certain desired skill set or position on the board? Because if you don't ask, you're not going to get it. It should be a mutual responsibility and a mutual service. It's a privilege to serve on the board, and it is service. But if you don't know what you're asking for, you can pretty much guarantee you're not going to get it.
Can I add one thing to that comment? Because I agree with everything you said, and I think the only other thing that I would add is that we talk generally about the board, but very rarely talk about the chair, and the language I was about to use was you need a strong chair. But by strong, I don't necessarily mean like imposing and dominating. I mean someone who understands how to work with and manage people, deadlines, expectations, how to be able to celebrate success, how to be able to build scaffolding around challenges that people have. So like the chair, I think, is actually almost more important than the rest of the board, because you can have people who have clarity about all those things, but if they don't have someone whose whole job, again, like I said, my job is to take care of my people. The job of the chair is to actually manage the board, manage how it works, how it meets its deadlines, how it's supported. So as you're thinking about your boards, either the ones you'll build or the ones you have, think about a different profile for what it means to be a chair. Like I've had experiences with great people who are committed to our mission, but had never really managed people. Never been in a position where people were accountable to them, so that they worked to build a process that was more like a flat approach, which you can do what I'm saying with a flat approach. But they never wanted people to feel accountable to them. They wanted people to feel accountable to this amorphous organization that isn't holding them accountable. So thinking about how it is that you support the aspirations of these amazing people who are volunteering their time to help you fulfill your mission, and how it is that you have a partner in your chair that can actually do that kind of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month interaction and support that makes them feel even more involved and invested because their contributions are celebrated just as much as the general work of the organization.
So this is a follow-up to Monty, your comment earlier. First of all, I just got to say that your organization is doing amazing work. You are being heard in DC, and I appreciate everything. I also love the Board of Protectors. I'm going to use that. I got a board meeting tonight, and we are going to we're going to change the way that we're looking at it. So my question is specifically on board accountability in terms of their own training. Do you offer them suggestions for resources for training? And then how do you follow up with them to make sure that they actually followed through with that?
So I'm actually going to give a shout out to Auntie because what I do is I get that funding alert every Monday, and at the bottom there's a gang of trainings that include things like workshops that are being led by the pro bono lawyers and a range of other trainings. So every time I see a training that I think could benefit someone on the board, I send it to the whole group. But in the interest of full disclosure, that realization about the strength of the chair is a realization I'm having right now, like literally this month. Because I have a team of amazing people who want to be held accountable and supported in achieving standards and don't necessarily have the scaffolding provided by the chair. So what I'm preparing to do is actually to work to build the scaffolding around my chair to be able to support her and her efforts to support everybody else. And I think that part of that is because I'm a founder, it's different. Like, it's just going to be different when you found a thing because the way that people try to hold you accountable is different. So the way that you interact with the people that are your boss or the protectors of the institution that you're charged with managing is just different. And so I'm accepting that fact. But I think for people that are not founders, the idea of like the letter of agreements you have with your board member is super important. Does everybody here have a letter of agreement that your board signs? By show of hands? I saw like 4 people. Okay. So by letter of agreement, I mean it outlines things like how many meetings they have to attend a year, what percentage of those they can miss, how much their annual dues or contributions are, what's their give or get, what's the term limit if you have those. Lots of people recommend term limits, but to be honest, I think most people have term limits because they don't know how to ask people to step down. If you've got somebody that's amazing, let them stay forever and attract more amazing people and give them time off to like step back. But it doesn't need to be about a term. It really just needs to be about how much really they have to give. That letter of agreement is your contract with your board member so that they can hold themselves accountable and they know, like was said earlier, they know from the door what you're expecting and what you need. And I think, upon reflection, I think I probably need a separate letter of agreement for people who agree to be executive board members, because that regular letter of agreement is just general, this is what we expect from everybody. But you should probably have different expectations for the executives that are responsible. That's your chair, your vice chair, your treasurer, and your secretary. Have a different set of expectations for them that's on top of. It's not just the job description, because we have job descriptions for those positions, or position descriptions for those positions, but their fundraising expectations should probably be higher, even if it's a little bit higher, just because they have to lead the charge in the work that you're doing. That letter's, just like you have a contract with a contractor or a letter of agreement with someone who works for you, you should treat your board the same way, that even though it's service that has a specific set of outcomes that are desired. And the more you can do to make that clear to them, the more likely you'll actually achieve those goals.
change the conversation a little bit. And I just want to piggyback a little bit off of that, how important it is that the board does know that their position and that you make it clear. And I would say, like you're saying, that there's probably some trainings out there that are pro bono, but don't be afraid to bring somebody in from the outside, because I think bringing someone in who is a neutral party can be very beneficial to a board, because like you said, the relationships, things, they may receive it better from someone who's not within the organization, and it helps to strengthen the board. But I also have a question about just resources. I wasn't here in the beginning, so I don't know how many other people are looking to start or have organizations that will have membership based, and it's very specifically, I'm looking for resources about how to start that process. Like, do you have to wait until the 501c3 is already rolling before you start to try to basically recruit or to start your membership, or do you want to start to have a buzz around what you're doing, and then, or can you do it at the same time? Is that clear? Does that make sense?
What comes first, the chicken or the egg?
So you are 501c3, are you waiting for your determination letter, is that it?
I haven't applied for it yet.
Oh. But when you apply for it, they're going to ask you, are you going to have members? And you're going to have to answer that question.
Well, the answer is I do want to have members, but how do you ask someone to become a member of something that's not already in place?
Okay, when you, see, I'm a little,
So the,
so when you say you want them to be a member of your nonprofit, so what does that mean? Are they going to get special things, like are they going to have to pay for the membership? I'm not clear on when you say membership.
So, for example, I'm a member now of Alliance, which is a national organization, and in order to become a member, you have to pay a fee.
So it's more of the association, a nonprofit association, is that what you're saying? Okay. I'm not that clear on that. That's why, again, I always refer people back to Regina to make sure that you're going to do the legal things that you need to do, because I'm not, having memberships is kind of dicey, so you want to make sure when you start, that you start the right way. So I would definitely get in touch with the DC Pro Bono Law Office. Did you have something?
no, I was just going to say the question, this was a question that kind of got asked earlier about fiscal sponsors. If you're trying to raise money from individuals, as soon as you turn in the paperwork, you can start raising money from individuals. It's called a good faith donation. So people give to you in the good faith that your nonprofit will be registered, so they can actually start to write that off on their taxes. I think Auntie is right about the idea of talking to the lawyer to make sure, because I don't really know that because you're collecting basically dues to be a member, that's going to be tax deductible, so they're not really worried about writing that off on their taxes. So you could decide right now you're going to start recruiting members of a thing. It's just a question. The nonprofit status is really just about taxes and people being able to write it off, and you being exempt from paying particular taxes.
I have two questions. The first question is, in a nonprofit, is it necessary to have a human resources person in the company? And if it's not, then how do you manage any kind of employee dysfunction or labor relations type of activity?
So this is actually something I think is really important. Lots of people, when they talk about nonprofits, they act as if there's something like really different. We often forget the last word, which is business. So it's a nonprofit business, which doesn't mean it's not a business in the sense that a business is a for-profit business is a traditional business. It really is about taxes. the best way to think about it is what a nonprofit is versus a for-profit is a nonprofit is a business that operates in the marketplace that could not exist providing that service without a subsidy. That it needs a subsidy in order to be able to exist. That if it didn't have a grant or a donation, it could not do the work. That's basically the primary difference. And that when people give you money to do that work, they're able to write it off on their taxes as a charitable deduction. Other than that, it's still a regular business. I don't have an HR person, but there are programs like Back Office in a Box that do the kind of services that you're asking about. If you just Googled Back Office in a Box, they do HR. Like if you need to do payroll, you go through a payroll service. There's plenty of companies you can hire to do those various things. But I would just encourage you to think about a nonprofit in the same way you think about a regular business, but that the subsidy is what's the key difference.
Before you, I just want to let everybody know, just because we keep saying nonprofit does not mean you don't want to make a profit. I want to make that perfectly clear. You can make a profit, but it's what you do with the monies that you do make, because you do use the monies that you get from, your funders, you use it for your programs, but you can make a profit. Because if you don't make a profit, how are you going to run your business? I just want to make that perfectly clear. Nonprofit does not mean you can't make a profit.
Can I just piggyback on that? Sorry, I love to talk. But just with that last point, I had this realization, again, I've been thinking about this a lot, preparing for this panel maybe, that the way to think about a nonprofit is the way that I'm thinking about the nonprofit I run is to think about it like a retail store. The retail stores basically operate for the holidays. When the holidays come, they make between 50 and 70% of their income for the whole year. And then they live the rest of the year with that money and the smaller profits they'll make throughout the year. If I think about grants the same way, I get a grant for $200,000, and then it becomes my responsibility to think about how to spread that $200,000 over the whole year. So that in the same way that they benefit from the sale that everybody goes and participates in, I benefit from grant deadlines that happen to usually be around the same time. We'll get a large influx of cash, which was where our bank relationship comes in, us being able to navigate the times between while we're waiting for money. Like, we shouldn't think about nonprofits as completely different than for-profits. Because the primary difference is when we make a profit, I don't get to give it to myself. It stays in the organization, it stays in the company. That's really the difference.
Just, I'm sorry, just a quick comment on whether you should have a HR person or not. I would highly recommend that you outsource that work, whether it's someone who's willing to do that on a volunteer basis, working with a financial institution, a payroll company. Majority of financial institutions nowadays offer not just payroll processing, but also back office HR work, and there are other nonprofit organizations that help out in that space, rather than having a full-time person and adding that overhead.
A minimum number of board of trustees that you should have in a nonprofit? Is there a requirement for the number? Three.
In Washington, D.C., it's 3. You need 3 officers in order to register as a corporation.
Hi, I apologize if this was already addressed earlier. I was late, but I wanted to know when you started your nonprofit, Mazi, was it were you on the board, or did you always keep that separate from your founder, executive director?
Yeah, so I'm still a board member. I'm an ex officio board member, which means I have no vote. So I'm there at the meeting and I'm able to voice my concerns, but I actually don't get a vote. And part of that is about the board does a number of things, including deciding on what my compensation level is, doing my annual review. But I also think being an ex officio member, and I know some people actually are on boards and they're voting members, my job is to persuade. Like, if I have a position, my voice should matter more than my vote. And it's up to me to be able to listen and to persuade and sometimes lose because I'm outnumbered by members of the community. So that's also the question about how you build your board and the way it is they see themselves as protectors, because maybe sometimes they might need to protect the institution from the founder if they see it going in a radically different direction. Never. So as an ex officio, I'm not an officer and I have no vote.
We have time for 2 more questions. Anybody else? Can we give another round of applause for our panelists?